Hi guys, it's Angela here. So in today's video I'm going to be reviewing this Watchtower magazine that I received from the Jehovah's Witnesses when they knocked on my door. Now this video is a follow-on from the video about that encounter with Jehovah's Witnesses. So if you haven't seen that video, please look at the link below and you can watch the video. I will post it in the description box below. If this is your first time here to my channel, welcome. I hope that you will subscribe and hit that notification bell so you will be notified of all my other videos. And if you have previously subscribed, then welcome back. So I took a copy of the Watchtower. I was really surprised that they only offered the Watchtower magazine, and I asked for a copy of the Awake magazine, to which they explained that the magazines come out bi-monthly. So one month the Watchtower comes out and the following month the Awake magazines comes out, and she said that they alternate these in order to save costs. The other thing I noticed was just how thin the magazine is. It's literally 16 pages, in length, whereas back in the day it was, you know, it was double the size, at least double. And then you had the Watchtower and the Awake being presented as a twosome. So if you've not seen the video about how I challenged them on why there is all those cutbacks, and could it be because the organisation is now having to spend out millions in compensation in regards to their child abuse claims? If you've not seen that video, I'll post the link below, so please feel free to watch it. So I wanted to review this magazine. So as I'm going through the magazine, the first heading is Who is God? And in the first paragraph and the first page, the way that I read it, it comes across as non-confrontational, it's non-offensive, it's quite general, it's quite reasonable and quite agreeable, because it makes some very general statements that if you have a faith and believe in God, or even if you don't, then it's quite easy reading. You know, there's nothing in there that's going to make you sort of stand up and disagree. So, you know, from an opening page, which if most people are going to read anything, it's going to be the opening page, you'd probably think, yeah, you know, that's fine. No reason why I wouldn't want to continue. But then over the page, in the next section, it's called What is God's Name? Now this is where it starts to get interesting. It uses a quote from Isaiah, and it's Isaiah 42 and verse 8. And there it states, I am Jehovah, that is my name. And I just thought that this was really interesting because, as we know, the organisation adopts the name Jehovah. The article goes on to say that many groups, religions and other Bibles chooses to remove Jehovah's name and use the Lord. So I decided to go along and pull out my version of the Bible, which is the Thompson Chain version of the Bible, which is based on the King James Version. I also did some general research to see whether this statement is backed up, to see whether indeed the Bible uses Jehovah's name, and also whether, as they claim, that the name Jehovah is often replaced with the Lord. So in doing my research on the internet, I went to a site called BibleStudyTools.com, and I entered Isaiah chapter 42 verse 8, and it threw up a list of Bibles that you can compare that verse to. And interestingly, none of those versions were the New World Translation of the scriptures, which is what Jehovah's Witnesses use. And that generally is because it's not recognised as a legitimate Bible in general society. You know, that Bible is produced by the Jehovah's Witnesses and they use it as their main source, and nobody else in the world will use it as a reference. So in total, there were 35 versions of the Bible that you could compare that verse to. And this is my findings. Now, anybody can go on that website and you could do your own research and see the results for yourself. So in that verse, 26 out of 35 versions of the Bible uses the word Lord. Next was the word Yahweh, and 3 versions use the term Yahweh. Only 3 versions of the Bible uses the word Jehovah. 2 uses other versions such as Adonai and Hashem, and only 1 version of the Bible uses the word God. So we could see that the majority of Bibles in common use that is widely available throughout the world uses the word the Lord. And that is what is stated in my Bible, the Lord. So I just found it interesting that in this magazine they choose to use the word Jehovah, and they're entitled to do that, but they make a statement, and it's almost a bit of a dig, by saying, and I'll read it for you. It says, "Is that name new to you?" And they're referring to the name Jehovah. "It may well be, because many translations of the Bible uses God's name sparingly, if at all. They often replace it with the word the Lord." So I just found that it was almost like they're having a dig that, well, we're the only ones, well, we're using Jehovah, and, you know, the majority of Bibles replace it with the word the Lord. So I just thought that that was interesting, following their general opening page, and now they're sort of going in and having a little bit of a dig, but also using the foundation, explaining their rationale for using the word Jehovah throughout the rest of the article. Now, under the subheading, what the name reveals, this is where it just becomes a little bit uncomfortable for me, is the word, because it says under the subheading, what the name reveals, towards the end of the article, it says, learning God's name is the vital step to knowing him, but we must not stop there. We need to discover the persona behind the name. We need to learn what he is like. Now that for me poses a problem, because my particular view is that God is magnificent, he's almighty, he's awesome, he is the universe, he is everything. And when you start, in my opinion, when you start to give all the almighty, the divine, the universe, the creator, the magnificent being, when you start to hone him down into a persona, that is where it becomes problematic for me, because we can't, what they're trying to do is put a personality to God, and to say God is like this, God is like that, this is what he says, this is what he thinks, this is what he likes, this is what he dislikes, this is what he loves, this is what he hates, this is what he wants you to wear, this is what he wants you to think, and this is what he wants you to do. This is pleasing to him, this is displeasing to him. And that is where the whole basis of religion comes in. And then that whole relationship between God, the Almighty, the divine, and man and religion starts to get skewed, and it gets murky. And I know that there will be people out there who will disagree with me, and that's absolutely fine. That is my view. I feel that when we start to give God a personality and start addressing him by his name, then we're almost making ourselves on a par with him, thinking that we know what he likes, what he doesn't like. You know, when I was growing up, and I'm sure this is the same for many people, that you could not address your parents or your grandparents or your aunts and uncles, your elders, by their first name. You wouldn't dare to do that. You had to maintain that level of respect by referring to them as mum and dad, auntie, uncle, grandma, granddad. You wouldn't dare talk about them like you're talking to your friends. You just wouldn't dare. You have that level of respect for them. And I feel in the same manner that when we start to give God a name and a persona, as they state in this article, then we almost lose that level of respect goes. And it certainly goes when we claim, as Jehovah's Witnesses do, to be his representative on earth, his mouthpiece, his channel of communication, that we dare to say that we know what he thinks, we know what he likes, what pleases him, what displeases him, and all of that. I feel that we get on really dangerous grounds. And the article here expresses that we need to discover the persona behind the name, and that's what they state, that we need to get to know the persona. So yeah, you know, that's my thoughts on that. Then the next section, it says, what is God's name? And it then goes on with a subheading, where did God come from? So they're asking this question, and throughout that little section here, in this little section here, and as you can see, I've highlighted it. You know, it's taken me back to when I used to be a good old Jehovah's Witness and read my magazines and highlight it. So in this section, it says, where did God come from? And it asks the question, but it doesn't answer it. They've just not answered it at all. So the next section is, what is God like? Now, again, the first page, non-confrontational, it's quite general. Then the second page, we're now questioning, you know, we need to get to know God's persona. And this stage, you know, most people might say, okay, that's still fairly reasonable. And then the third page, what is God like? Now they're venturing, in my opinion, into sort of some grey waters, really sort of trying to set out God's personality. And it's saying that God is, and they've got subheadings that says God is powerful. It talks about that. It talks about God is wise. It gives some references to that. It even makes some interesting points here. It talks about how can we benefit from God's wisdom. And it makes some very common sense points. I have to put my hand up and agree. These are common sense points. It says here, the article suggests that the Creator knows what we need to be happy. Drawing from his vast knowledge and understanding, he provides wise counsel. He provides wise counsel in his word, the Bible. For example, it urges, continue forgiving one another freely. Now, that's, common sense. Again, it's a good basis to live by. And then it says, yes, research has found that being forgiving can improve one's sleep and lower blood pressure. And that's absolutely true. We know that when you live a good life and you're reasonable in your dealings, it reduces your stress and lowers blood pressure. Then it says it may also reduce the risk of depression and other health issues. God is wise. And that's absolutely true. I have no problem with that. So again, the article, the magazine is setting out some good principles based on the Bible, non-confrontational and very, very reasonable. So again, somebody who's reading this article for the first time, who's coming across Jehovah's Witnesses for the first time, they may read this and think, actually, this is good, sound advice. Nothing wrong with that. Then it carries on. It says God is just, and it talks about areas in which God is just, and also God is love. Now, I have no problems with those 4 areas because we know that God is all of those things. But I just feel that they've painted such a pretty picture of God. What they failed to set out is the other side of God's attributes, the other side of this persona. And having read the Bible on many occasions over the years, we also know that the Bible demonstrates that God is unjust, he's unforgiving, he's bloodthirsty, he's an ethnic cleanser, he's homophobic, racist, infanticidal. He is a malevolent bully, he's destructive, he's threatening, he's all of these other things. There's no mention of that there. They've painted this pretty picture of God, and why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they? They don't want to scare people off. They want people to come to know God's persona. And it's almost, and as I was thinking about the other attributes of God, I thought it's so interesting because anybody who is an ex-Jehovah's Witness will, I'm sure, agree with me that some of the attributes that I've just mentioned are attributes that the Jehovah's Witnesses, the elders, the congregation, and certainly the governing body displays some of those negative attributes, such as being unjust. God in the Bible, he is an unjust God. And don't we see the governing bodies and elders, through their policies and procedures, act in an unjust way? With their shunning policy, for example, don't we see that they're unforgiving? Don't we see that they promote unforgiveness amongst their members to again shun families, their loved ones? And God, as we know, is unforgiving. Now, don't we know in the Bible that God is homophobic and racist? And just have a look at the history of the Jehovah's Witness organisation, right from the inception with Charles Taze Russell. The organisation had strong racist views, and I'm going to do a video about these areas, all these areas that I mentioned. I'm going to do videos on them, okay? But we know through the history of the organisation, Charles Taze Russell had very strong racial views. It's shocking. It really is shocking. The organisation is homophobic. It just, I mean, again, there's going to be a video coming out about this, but the organisation is just clear, flat out homophobic. Now, God is a malevolent bully, I've just mentioned, and don't you think that the elders and the governing body, the way that they deal with people, are bullies? And don't we see the characteristic of bullying in the organisation? It's very much do what I say, otherwise we're putting you out. You lose your privileges, you lose your family, you lose your friends. You know, it's this culture of bullying, and we know that in the Bible there's so many references to God being a bully. The God of the Bible is also destructive and threatening, and isn't that the same characteristics that we see in the Christian congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses today? They are threatening. Again, you know, the threat of losing your family, the threat of losing your life if you don't adhere to their doctrines on blood. So yes, the article in the Watchtower paints this very pretty picture of love, of justness, of wisdom, and almost saying that this is God's persona. But what they fail to do is show the other side of God's persona, which we know is strongly demonstrated in the congregation. Moving on, the next section of the magazine talks about what has God done. Now, this is where, in my opinion, it starts a little bit heavy, and in comes the indoctrination. So it talks about, under the heading, God created all things for our good. It says in the second paragraph, Jehovah enriches our life by creating humans in his image. It then says that means he made it possible for us to reflect in a small way his incomparable qualities. So almost saying that, well, we're made, bearing in mind, the preceding article has just talked about God is powerful, God is wise, God is just, and God is love. They're now trying to say that we're made in his image, and we have these qualities in a small and incomparable way. We can have those qualities. So kind of like just, you know, trickling it in there. Then it says, he endowed us with spiritual capacity or ability to understand his views and values. Interesting. Once we start to give the Almighty, the all-powerful, the divine, a persona, and a human persona, it allows us to start thinking that we can know him. And this is basically what it says in this sentence, because it says he endows us with spiritual capacity or the ability to understand his views and values. And basically Jehovah's Witnesses are saying that they are God's channel, and through the governing body, this group of men, they have the spiritual capacity to understand God's views and his values. And I just think that this is so dangerous for anybody to think that we can understand. I mean, doesn't the Bible says, who is man to understand the mind of God? We can't do that. But yet they're saying here that because of this spiritual endowment, we can understand his views. So it's almost like they're setting the foundation of indoctrination to say, yeah, you know, we know God, you know, we understand his persona. It then goes on to say, as we endeavour to live by these, we enjoy greater happiness and meaning in life. More than that, he gave us the potential for building a relationship with him. Now, the article goes on to say, interestingly, Jehovah created the earth so that humans could live forever in it. Now, this is where I think that they really start getting into their doctrines. It says, the earth he has given to the sons of men, and he did not create it simply for nothing, but formed it to be inhabited. Inhabited by whom and for how long? The righteous will possess the earth, and they will live forever on it. Now, this is where I think that they're really starting to get into their theology and their philosophy about living in this paradise earth forever. And it depends on how you want to read it, because the way that the Jehovah's Witnesses then go on to interpret the scriptures is that, which then links into their doctrines, which then becomes quite different to mainstream Christians. They're trying to say that humans will inherit the earth and live forever on the earth, meaning that a single person will never die, will continue living forever and ever on earth, whereas many Christians believe that when you will have your time here on earth, and then you die and you go to heaven, a paradise in heaven. But Jehovah's Witnesses are using this literally to say that you're going to be living forever on earth, because it says, they use the scripture to say the righteous will possess the earth and they will live forever on it. Now, you know, when I read that scripture, now that I am no longer a Jehovah's Witness and is using my thinking skills and my own mind and my intelligence, what that tells me is that the earth is here and people will come, live their life, die. The next generation will come, live their life and die, and the next generation, the next generation, the next generation, and generations after generations after generations will inhabit the earth. And that's how I read it. I'm not reading it as I'm here and I'm just going to live forever on this earth. You know, and that is what I was taught and indoctrinated when I used to go. But now I don't see it. I don't read that scripture like that anymore. So it's interesting the way that they're slowly leading up to that indoctrination in this article. The article then goes on with other subheadings. God has provided his written word and God guarantees his purpose. It moves on, it talks then about Jesus and the ransom sacrifice. And the way that when I read the rest of that that article, it almost came across like Jesus is the sidekick, and that Jesus came, had his little part to play and has now moved on. And they didn't really give any weight or any balance to Jesus in his capacity as the Son of God, if that's what you believe. But the way that I was reading it was that very much as the sidekick. And it's all about Jehovah and his persona. So moving on to the next section, it says, what will God do? So then this is where they really start to get heavy in the indoctrination with their views and their beliefs. And it talks about the end of all wickedness. And interestingly, just referring back to my conversation with Jehovah's Witnesses yesterday when they knocked my door, one of the points, I mean, we talked about so many things. So, and in fact, towards the end of the conversation, one of the older ladies said, she says, it's been fantastic talking to you. She says, I'm so happy that we've had this opportunity to talk to you. She says, it's very unusual for us to meet somebody on the door and we get to have such a long and in-depth conversation. And I thought, yeah, you've clocked up well over an hour on your timesheet. You know, you've clocked up lots of minutes that the elders will be happy with just on my call. So, but yeah, that was just a side point that I've just remembered. But they were also trying to justify, again, their beliefs by saying, and one of the sisters mentioned the scripture in Timothy about, you know, the wickedness, saying that we're living in the last days and that there's a huge amount of wickedness and crime and everything going on in the community, and trying to use that to say we're living in the last days. And I was like, listen, love, it depends on your perspective. And I explained to her that where I live, in my little part of the world, you know, it's safe. I mean, I explained to her my back door was broken for nearly 2 years. The lock didn't work. We never once was burgled or broken into, never felt unsafe. I've gone to bed and left my kitchen windows, my front windows open. It's so safe, it's so quiet, it's so peaceful. So I'm already living in a paradise, if you like, in my area of the world. I get on with all my neighbours. We have quite a nice, comfortable life, and, you know, everything's hunky-dory for me. But where I used to live previously, if you came knocking my door, where I lived previously, it was high levels of crime. It wasn't very well kept. There was the area was notorious for gangs. Then yes, if you're talking to me there, then my view, although I doubt it in terms of the Jehovah's Witness, but in my view in terms of security and crime may well be very different. So I explained to her, you know, you can't just make this blanket assumption. It's about perspective. Then she went on to say, well, don't you think that crime generally has increased? And I then went on to say, again, it's about perspective. If you are looking at crime, then has it increased? Well, maybe it has. I'm very much into history, and I said to her, if you look back in history, you know, even if you go back 100 or so years and you look at the Victorians, the earth wasn't as heavily populated, so the level of crime was probably comparable. But in this day and age, we have so much better channels of communication. We know when a crime is committed on the other side of the world. We know when there's an earthquake. We know, like, the increasing levels of health challenges because of the levels of communication. Back 100, 200, 500, 2,000 years ago, it was probably the same. The earth was less populated, but they didn't have the methods of knowing what was happening at the time. So I said, you can't just say we've got more crime and more problems in the earth and use that to surmise that we're living in the time of the end. So that argument just wasn't washing with me, and they again changed the subject really quickly. But just going back to this article, again, it talks about the end of all wickedness. And that's why I mentioned that little scenario, because it just came to mind. But they mention the end of all wickedness. Then it talks about making the earth a paradise. Again, really getting full swing with the indoctrination. It says, you know, they're putting the idea forward that there's going to be lasting peace and security. Well, again, it depends where you live, you know, as to whether you feel that you want that or whether you have that now. Ample and wholesome food. Well, you know, I don't want to live forever if I can't get hold of my KFC and my McDonald's. Okay, I'm joking, but do you know what I mean? I love me food, and I don't want to live on pulses and grains all my life. Do you know what I mean? So again, it's your perspective. It talks about providing suitable homes and satisfying work. And then it asks the question, do you long to see such conditions? Now, again, I just find that their terminology and wording is very interesting, because if you are living in a very deprived area and you haven't got access to good housing, to jobs, to good quality food, and you live in a crime-ridden area, then of course you're going to say that you want these things. So again, I think that their tactic is really trying to hone down on people's insecurities, on the conditions that they live in. Whereas, you know, if that doesn't apply to everybody, but just the questioning, do you long to see such conditions? I mean, not many people are going to say no. Most people are going to say yes. They want to see things improved. And it reminds me very much of the politicians and their tactics when it comes up to election, you know, singing that song that they're going to be better schools, better education, you know, security, very political. Then it talks about, under the next subheading, the eradication of sickness and death. And it breaks it down. The eradication, sickness will be eradicated, death will no longer plague mankind, people will live forever, and those who have died will be brought back to life. Now again, they're really trying to hone in on people's emotions, because I mean, you tell me who you know that hasn't been affected by sickness and death and ill health. Everybody has. So they're using these very basic tactics to tap into people's emotions. And then lastly, they put those who have died will be brought back. And again, I just find that is really cruel, because if you've lost your loved ones and you're now saying that, and I remember at my mum's funeral, they used these scriptures and used these doctrines to say that, you know, don't fear, she's gone temporarily, but she's going to live again, she's going to be resurrected. And, you know, I just sat there and I was just like grinding my teeth, only because my mother died as Jehovah's Witness and that is what she would have wanted. But I just felt that it was really inappropriate to play on people's emotions at a time where people are vulnerable. They're playing on emotions to say, yes, they died, but actually we have a hope. And the Bible tells us that they're going to be resurrected. And I just found it really distasteful. So they're using these things to play on people's emotions in this article. And as I say, everybody, you know, most people will be touched and affected by these things. And then it talks, coming towards the end, that there is going to be an establishment of a perfect government. And again, you know, wherever you live, most people are unhappy with the state of politics and the state of the government, but they again using this to as their doctrines to say, well, if you're unhappy with the state of politics, then don't worry, because we have a hope. And if you come along and study with us, we can share more information about this hope that things are going to get better. Then, interestingly, coming to the end, they talk about God's kingdom will exercise authority all over the earth and eliminate all the woes and sufferings from its realm. So again, presenting this very euphoric bubble that, you know, everything's going to be okay, everything's fine, you know, because God has promised, this God that we now know, this God of love, justice, wisdom, who we can get to know. And in fact, if you stick with us, you know, we'll show you what his thoughts are and what he thinks. He's going to turn this earth into a paradise earth in which you can live forever if you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And that's the catch. That's what they don't set out in the article. They don't set it out in black and white that you can benefit from this absolute wonderful promise if you become one of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's alluded to very subtly, but it's not stated explicitly. So it then goes on in the last section, what can knowing God mean for you? It then talks in this very provocative language. It talks about, imagine the precious gifts that awaits you. It talks about having a close friendship with God, with Jehovah God. It talks about genuine happiness and God being a happy God. And do you know what? When I was a Jehovah's Witness, the one thing that we fooled ourselves into thinking, and I have to say that, was we all walked around, you know, with these big grins and these big smiles on our face and saying, oh, we're happy, we serve the happy God, we're happy. And it was almost like, you know, we're trying to convince ourselves that we're happy, we're loving, we all love each other. And even now, you know, when I talk to my family who's still as Jehovah's Witnesses, that's what they spew out, is that they're happy, they live happy lives, they love each other, and it's just this very euphoric place where no problems ever exists. And it just takes me back to when I used to go along and what I used to say, and I'm ashamed of it. I used to say those things, I used to believe those things, and it's reiterated in this article. It then goes on, becoming close to him and imitating his ways will bring you genuine happiness. So almost implying that you can't be happy unless you get to know God, become his friend, access these precious gifts, draw close to him, have a friendship with him. Oh, and by the way, it only happens if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I just find that, what's the word? Wrong. I can't think of a better word, but it's wrong. It feels wrong to say and suggest that. It then says, you will be able to build a happy life by avoiding dangerous lifestyles, cultivating healthy habits, and maintaining good relationships with others. So again, they're saying that, you know, there's no way you can build a happy life unless you get to know God and, you know, be part of us. Which again, I just find really provocative, because there are so many people that are happy. They live happy, fulfilled, contented, healthy lives without being Christian, being religious, and being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And in fact, some of the most unhappy people are Jehovah's Witnesses, despite the gloss. And they're unhappy when they leave. They're happy when they've been shunned, where they can't talk to their family, their friends. It's crazy. It then says, you will come to agree. Now, I'm just really incensed by this statement. It says, you will come to agree with what the psalmist says. Well, maybe I don't agree. It's almost, again, taking my right away to think independently by that statement. So again, really subtly laying the foundation to say, you know what, when you come along and we study with you, you will agree. You will agree. And they're getting you to get on that mind, on that path of thinking that by subtly saying, you will agree with the psalmist who said, drawing near to God is good for me. You know, again, really subtle. I can only have what's good if I draw close to God. So again, you can see towards the end of the article, towards the end of the magazine, it starts to get a little bit heavy. Then it goes on to say, Jehovah promised his servants, I will give you advice with my eye upon you. That means that Jehovah gives the servants, that means Jehovah gives his servants personal attention and tailors his care to fit their individual needs. So again, they're being very specific by saying his servants. So people who serve Jehovah, who serve the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, those who serve the governing body, because really, come on, let's be honest, that's what Jehovah really means. They're not talking about God, they're not talking about the divine, they're not talking about the almighty, they're not talking about the great power that is. They're talking about Jehovah, who really is the governing body, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, started by Charles Taze Russell. It says, once you have developed a proper relationship, and again, their wording is very provocative. They're not talking about just developing a relationship. They're saying, no. A relationship with God is not good enough. You need to develop a proper relationship. It says, once you have developed a proper relationship with Jehovah, you will find that he is always there for you. So basically they're saying a proper relationship with the governing body, with the organisation. You need to develop a proper relationship for us to be there for you. Very subtle. And then it continues, a grand future. In addition to offering you the key to a happy and satisfying life now, Jehovah God also opens to you a marvellous future. So again, more provocative words. And that really brings me to the end of the article. So in conclusion, I wanted a copy of the Watchtower because I haven't read a Watchtower for over 30 years and I wanted to see what they were saying, and it's pretty much the same as it's always been. They start off very very general, very open, very what's the word, very agreeable, and very non-specific, and then it just starts to very slowly take you down a path where they start gently and very subtly introducing their terminology, their ideas, their thoughts, their doctrines, all very subtly. And before you know it, you are now going down this path thinking that, oh, it all sounds reasonable because the first part of the article was reasonable and you agreed with it, so why wouldn't you continue agreeing? And then they use very, very, very provocative words that can be read into, that has double meanings, and that appeals to human nature, really. So very subtle, very skillful, I have to say, very, very skillful. And I could see why so many people are attracted to the organisation, and once in, they find it very difficult to start thinking for themselves, because they're living in this euphoria, this bubble of we are happy, everything's wonderful, we've got this marvellous hope of this precious gift, and all of these, you know, these terms that can easily sway people, and people do get swayed. They have their the wool pulled over their eyes, and the indoctrination then becomes so deep because it's so subtle over time. It's very hard for people to wake up, but it is possible to wake up. I mean, I woke up in my 20s. I'm so glad that I did, and many, many people are waking up now for so many different reasons. So guys, I just wanted to share that with you. I would be interested in your thoughts and your comments, so please leave a comment. I do read all the comments that people leave. So yeah, please give thumbs up to my video, or thumbs down if you disagree with me. That's absolutely fine. I don't mind. All's fair in love and war, as they say. But please subscribe to my video if you've not done so. Please hit the red subscribe button and click the bell for notification of more videos that will be coming. So guys, have a wonderful day and keep crushing it. I'll see you soon. Take care, guys. Bye.